Hello, everyone. Welcome to our SAP Community Call. My name is Moshe Nave from the SAP Community team. Today, the call will be about a journey from on-premise integration to the cloud. And I'll start by handing it over to Gayathri, Senior Product Manager for SAP Integration Suite.
Thanks, Moshe. Hello and welcome also from my side. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Vadim Klimov. Vadim is joining us from the United Kingdom, and he is an enterprise architect as well as an integration veteran at ARM. Vadim works very closely with my team, and he's instrumental in developing the integration scenarios, both on-premise as well as in the cloud at ARM. ARM, like one of our many SAP customers, is undergoing a digital transformation journey, which means they are evolving their integration platform from on-premise to the cloud in order to meet the demands of a highly heterogeneous and hybrid landscape. And we are seeing more and more of this with offerings like Rise with SAP. We have more than 12,000 plus customers who've been successfully using our on-premise integration offering like SAP Process Integration, SAP Process Orchestration for over 2 decades now. Last year in 2020, we announced that SAP Process Integration 7.5 will be the long-term stable release with the standard maintenance until 2027 and an extended maintenance until 2030. We also announced that SAP Integration Suite, which is our multi-cloud hybrid integration platform as a service, will be the logical successor to PI. From SAP, we've made recommendation of how you can future-proof your integration strategy as you move from on-prem to the cloud. But the focus of today's session is really to understand how our customers are doing this migration and what is their digital transformation looking like. And Vadim has promised to me that he will share what exactly the evolution of the integration landscape at ARM looks like, what are the challenges they faced, best practices, and some lessons learned. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Vadim to walk us through their integration journey. Thank you so much, and over to you, Vadim.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Gayathri, Moshe, thank you very much for having me here with you, and thanks a lot for so warm welcome. So here in this session, I would like to share some thoughts and some information about our journey from on-prem integration to the cloud from SAP perspective, from the perspective of SAP integration platforms. And without further words, let me switch on to slides and let's move on. So before we go to the SAP itself, to integration, let me just spend a couple of minutes to describe what ARM is about. So ARM is a UK-based company, and the ARM company was founded in 1990 in Cambridge, and this is where our headquarters is still is. And the company became international over years of operations in the semiconductors industry. And the main business of ARM is design of ARM microprocessors. So it's not manufacturing of microprocessors. This is what our customers and what our partners do. That's about the design of the intellectual property that fuels those processors. In that sense, the technology solutions which are provided by ARM to our partners, they vary significantly, and they cover a lot of different areas. So they cover Internet of Things, they cover artificial intelligence, automotive, security, mobile devices, 5G, and so on and so on and so on. And there are so many industries where this intellectual property can be found in the devices, starting from very tiny devices that fuel Internet of Things, and ending with servers, and quite a lot of mobile devices and laptops. They also use ARM chips under the hood. With this, we go to SAP landscape. And before we get to the SAP integration landscape, I would like to dedicate a couple of minutes to describe the context of that, because the SAP integration landscape in our company is closely linked with the SAP application landscape and with the entire enterprise IT landscape as such. So we shall not look into this from into integration landscape on its own. It's seen within the context. And our current setup for SAP systems and services at ARM is that we use a hybrid model. So several systems, and the core system S/4HANA is hosted in VPC, individual private cloud. And currently we are in the middle of the journey for migration from SAP ECC to SAP S/4HANA. And as an outcome of this journey, we shall be fully on S/4HANA, and there will be some more services and systems that will be onboarded, such as SAP GTS. We heavily use and rely on capabilities of Solution Manager in our landscape, and currently we do use SAP Process Orchestration. We will touch that in a minute. SAP Process Orchestration is the system that we literally onboarded as an ESB system almost 6 years ago, and now we are in progress of transition to SAP Integration Suite. We also use quite a lot of SAP cloud services. Some of them are SaaS applications like SuccessFactors, like Ariba, Concur, Entitlement Management System, and so on. And some of them are capabilities and services which are onboarded and provisioned as a part of BTP. So amongst them, we do have SAP Cloud Integration and SAP Open Connectors, as well as SAP API Business Hub that we heavily utilize in our day-to-day work. And for us, the journey is that we truly migrate from SAP ECC to S/4HANA, and we also migrate from process orchestration to the integration suite. Our landscape is formed not only of SAP systems, so it's truly heterogeneous, and we have so many non-SAP solutions and systems that are in there as well, and we have a mixture of those which are hosted on-prem or in VPC, and those which are provided as a cloud subscriptions. Now we step into the journey itself, and the journey for us from SAP integration capabilities started back in 2015. This is where we onboarded SAP Process Orchestration 740, and this was fully on-prem deployment, and we used distributed deployment because of security needs. So we had intranet, we had DMZ, and depending on what kind of integration, what is the party that we integrate with, interfaces used to use one or another runtime. In 2018, we had a technical project that aimed migration of SAP PO capabilities from on-prem to VPC. And together with this, we also used this opportunity to make a technical release upgrade. So what we did is we upgraded from 740 to 750, and we consolidated interfaces, we consolidated runtimes so that we only use central deployment option. This was purely technical project, so we didn't really do interface transformation there. So we did a technical migration as such. And for us, it was the first step towards the true cloud, because for us, this was the migration from on-prem to VPC. So we already started to employ some mindset where we don't own or we don't run and operate certain layers which are underlying to SAP PO. After that, we progressed with this move, and in 2019, we stepped into hybrid deployment. So we do still have SAP PO 750 in our landscape, although a number of interfaces gradually reduces in PO, and we onboarded cloud integration and open connectors. So back at that time, it was called platform integration. Now it's called cloud integration. Currently, these services are operated in neo tenants in our landscape, and we already have the future plan to migrate them to Cloud Foundry. And this migration shall also become the thing for us that will move us from different distinct services towards integration suite in SAP. So at the moment we are in hybrid mode, or we try to reduce the amount of interfaces in PO, and we try to increase the number of interfaces in the integration suite. We also use some other non-SAP systems, and we use some non-SAP integration platforms. So it's not only integration platform that is SAP, but it plays quite significant role in our landscape, especially when we speak about SAP to SAP integrations or SAP centric integrations. The S4 project, it was for us the enabler to change this mindset, to review and to rethink whether we are capable of moving, whether we want to move to the cloud. So the migration from SAP PO to integration suite, or in that time from PO to cloud platform integration and open connectors, it wasn't a purely technical thing that we did in our landscape. So it was fueled and it was facilitated by the wider transformation program that we had in our landscape, and that was one of core pillars was migration from ECC to S4. And for us at the moment, the ultimate target state is cloud for SAP Integration Platform. I wouldn't say that's the ultimate target state for the entirety of IT assets that we have in the landscape, but quite significant fundamental work is done to make that happen and to migrate several core systems and services to the cloud. and we use multi-cloud. So it's not a single cloud or single cloud provider to where we move. We have some systems, some non-SAP systems that are placed in different clouds. And here we go a bit of statistics from Integration Suite usage perspective before we step into the actual migration project. So at the moment, as I mentioned, we are in the middle of migration. So migration that we do is based on lines of business. So we started from finance, HR, and we progressed with procurement. And currently, we migrate sales lines of business, which is quite critical and which will introduce quite a lot of new interfaces and will significantly boost workload on both application systems and integration platforms. But right now in the production environment, in the Integration Suite, we have two capabilities that we use. It's cloud integration and open connectors. Quite a lot of workload happens in the cloud integration for us. This is where we have roughly 60 integration flows and 80 artifacts in total. So we have quite a few value mappings in there. All in all, we process roughly 60,000, sometimes a bit more, messages per month. And at the moment, we integrate around 18 systems and services using the Integration Suite capabilities. And those systems and services are a mixture of on-prem systems and cloud-based services, SAP and non-SAP. Or when we are done with the migration, when we will complete migration to S4, and when we will move interfaces from PO to Integration Suite, these numbers will significantly increase, especially the workload of messages. So the way how we develop interfaces and the way how we design interfaces is that those interfaces are tiny and we don't produce large messages, but there are some interfaces that might potentially produce high volume of messages. And now we come to the point where we discuss positioning of this migration project. So as I mentioned, we migrate from PO to the Integration Suite. We are on the way of this journey. And when we just started this journey, we had one significant question to answer. How do we position this project? So is it a technical migration of interfaces, like we had from PO 740 to 750? And in that sense, we could also migrate interfaces from PO to Integration Suite with minor adjustments, or it will be treated as a process and integration transformation. So there are some drawbacks and there are some advantages of both of them. So for technical migration, it's mostly a lift and shift of interfaces. So we wouldn't need to invest a lot into redesign of interfaces. There will be some adjustments, there will be some changes to the interfaces, but at least the fundamental work is what we could have reused from PO. For example, we could have reused some mappings as a result of this exercise. And another big advantage is the disruptive effect on application systems would be lower, which altogether means that the project would be shorter and it will not be that it will be cheaper. So the cost will be less. There is also a drawback of that. And for us, it was quite significant. In the technical migration, the migration of legacy end-to-end design will be still with us. So, and at a certain point of time, it might become a constraint in scope of improvements that we can make. The other part is, or the other approach is transformation. And this is the approach that we at ARM have chosen. So when we come to process transformation, this means that we don't only change the interface, or we don't only look into the interface, but we look holistically for end-to-end flow. And that is not only integration flow as such, but it's the business process flow. There is certain advantage in that. That's the opportunity for organization to review and reconsider integrations and also processes. So they can think about which applications are used, how they are used, and whether they shall be used in the future in the way they are used currently. The drawback is that a lot of redesign, quite fundamental ground redesign work will be required. And this will introduce necessity for significant re-implementation of integrations and application processes and retesting, which also means that the impact on integrated systems will be way more significant. ARM as a company decided that we go ahead with the transformation, and it wasn't only and purely because of integration capabilities. ARM decided to transform the application landscape. So integration was key and is a key and significant part in that, but it's accompanied by a lot of changes in the application landscape, in systems and services we use, and in processes that we use. So with such fundamental change as change of core application systems and core application business processes, it was almost unavoidable that integration will also have quite significant changes. So for us, there was quite small reuse of past artifacts and past integrations. A lot has been redesigned and is redeveloped from scratch. When we decided about how we position the project, and the integration was a part of this project, there were a few topics that we needed to consider. And for us, the move from on-prem to the cloud, I will speak for the integration platform, but it can also be extended to applications to some extent. We had to rethink design patterns that we use and development guidelines. From one hand side, it was because products were different, tools are different. From the second hand side, it was because some older patterns that we use and that worked optimally in on-prem world were not that optimal in the cloud. So we had to rethink about what is cloud friendly and what is cloud native, and not everything. Quite a lot of things that we had on-prem, they're not really cloud native or even cloud friendly. Second thing is product capabilities and best practices. So given that products are new, and although they are logical successors of products that we used, technically they consist of quite significantly different frameworks and runtimes. So these product capabilities had to be explored, and we also had to get used and had to get into best practices that are relevant for those products. Some best practices we could reuse from our on-prem knowledge, but some of those were quite significantly new to us. Next one is platform availability, performance, resilience, and scalability. Given that integration platform in our landscape plays the key role, it's P1 system. So its downtime or any unavailability or performance disruption is quite critical for business processes. So one key aspect that we had to consider, and we had to consider it quite sensitively, is the availability of the platform and any performance problems that, or any performance improvements that we can get moving to it. The next one is governance, change management, and audit, which is quite critical for any services and capabilities. The key aspect was to consider which tools within the platform or outside of it we can use in order to ensure that changes that are moved across the landscape are governed properly, that they follow the expected workflows, approval processes, review processes, and that they are audited. The next one is security compliance. It was quite critical in on-prem, and it became significantly more critical when we came to the cloud, is if all bits and pieces that form the interface, the integration end-to-end and in the middle, adhere to security requirements that ARM had. That's partly it's about development security, artifacts, access security. It's also about the runtime itself and interface data. It was about data that is in transit and also data that is at rest for those interfaces. Some security principles we had to review. So we couldn't just one-to-one map those security principles. So when we moved to the cloud, we had some compromises. We had some discussions about what we had to deprecate from what we used in the past. And also we looked into what opportunities new platform grants to us and what security improvements we can bring in. The next two, they come quite close hand in hand, operations and maintenance and segregation of duties. Given that we move on to the cloud, we shall not expect exactly the same organizations that are involved in the maintenance and day-to-day operations. So we have more partners that we collaborate with. We have SAP with whom we collaborate even more strongly and we rely on when we speak about cloud services. So it's about understanding which teams of which organizations are responsible for which layers and which capabilities within the platform and within tools that we use in day-to-day basis, and also different means how we can collaborate between those organizations and what are escalation paths. Coming from on-prem mindset, it's quite crucial that we shall significantly rely on those partners. So we shall ensure that we don't expect that everything is provided to the customer and customer has full access to lowest levels of the platform. This is about trust to partners and about collaboration. So if some issue happens or if some question happens, this is about how we communicate those questions so that we work comfortably. So a lot. For us, it was really a lot to consider, a lot to review, and we spent a lot of time thinking about how we can use this opportunity or this project to truly review what we used in the past and what we can use in the future. And this brought us to several principles. That's not the definite list, but I wanted to highlight the major principles that we agreed for SAP integration capabilities. And here I speak about the future capabilities, the cloud capabilities. So what we decided within the integration capabilities and application systems is that we would like to promote and we would like to put a central focus on event-driven and API-led integration partners. You can think of it as, to some extent, buzzwords. So they appear a lot in the current discussions of integrations. For us, it also shaped the way how we approach application systems and how we unlock data that is maintained in those application systems. So we agreed that for every object, for every key object or group of objects, we would like to ensure that we can expose access to them via APIs or via events. And actually it's not or, but it's and. So that the same object, the same data, for example, master data or some transactional data, it can be either accessed by external, by other systems using APIs of the relevant application system, or application systems can broadcast events. So they can emit events, and then the message broker that we use can broadcast those events to interested subscribers. But we didn't, and we don't look into these techniques as competitors. So in our perspective, in our view, they complement each other. So what we have in the core is we have the data model. For example, we take sales order, or we take a business partner from master data. We have the agreed data model that sits behind that data entity. And for that data model, it forms the core of the messages and operations that can be done with that data. So we define what's the data model for the object and which operations can be applied to that object. And then we can decide which APIs we would like to expose and which events, when the state of that object changes, shall be emitted, which means that we do groundwork once, we define data layer, data modeling layer, operations layer, and security that is also quite critical. We will speak about it. And then we can expose it in either of ways. The reason why we decided to go into this mode is for different systems, they might be comfortable with the different patterns. For some systems, they are more comfortable to consume APIs, so they only expect that relevant API is exposed. For other systems, they would like to have near real-time access to changes of data. So they're happy to subscribe for events and receive updates about events that happen in other systems as soon as possible and as quick as possible. So we wouldn't like to put constraints on other systems in the landscape. We would like to offer them both opportunities, how they consume literally the same data. The next one is, depending on the potential of reusability, we agree about whether the interfaces that we develop are scenario tailored or enterprise grade. So scenario tailored means that we develop something very specific to integrated systems. Enterprise grade means that we develop once and use several times across the landscape, and potentially not on the ARM landscape, but also we can expose it as an open API to our partners. For enterprise grade, we cannot afford that we have all APIs enterprise grade, because firstly, it's quite significant extra work that has to be done. And secondly, maintenance efforts once, and the second one is compatibility. So every API that is exposed, in our view, every API that is exposed by the system, we have to ensure that any further updates of the system or any further changes within the data model, they either will be backward compatible, or if they become backward incompatible, they are properly communicated to the partners. And in enterprise grade APIs, we assume that there are a lot of consumers that can rely on that API. So regression testing and backward compatibility become quite critical in this process. The next principle that we encourage within our landscape is usage and leverage of prepackaged content and standard capabilities. That's not only about SAP prepackaged content. So we heavily rely on SAP prepackaged content, but we also tend to use prepackaged content provided by non-SAP systems where it's applicable. So where those systems have similar concept as SAP does. I shall admit that for some areas, for some lines of business, it works in a better way. For some lines of business processes that we implement are quite tailored to ARM needs, and we literally have to deviate from this principle and go into custom development. And the last one in this list is secure by design. So for us, it's quite integral part of any design within the application and in interfaces and integrations that applications use or applications expose. What we encourage here is that we don't put security on top of interfaces that we design and develop, but we literally include security right at the beginning of the design work. The reason for this is because it can ensure that we can answer quite a lot of questions right at the beginning, and we can also see if there are any pitfalls or if there are any challenges that might hit us in the future because of security. Because if security is not met, if the baseline security is not met, then literally there is no way that this interface will have the future. So better to answer these questions right at the beginning. Next couple of slides, I would like to dedicate to a few use cases that we have currently for the integration suite. The first one will be for API-led integrations that we have, and I took SAP S/4HANA as an example, where SAP S/4HANA exposes APIs that need to be consumed by other systems. As I mentioned, S/4HANA system is hosted in the VPC environment in our landscape. So what we have is we have the cloud connector, and we literally try to follow best practices in that sense. So all inbound connections to S/4HANA from the cloud happen via cloud connector. In front of cloud connector, we have the firewall, which has IP allow list rules. And then what we do is we ensure that the transport protocol is secure. So we don't use insecure protocols. In that sense, it will be HTTPS. And then on S/4HANA side, out of variety of different APIs that are exposed out of the box and that we develop as a custom, we tend to consume those which are OData as our major preference and SOAP as our fallback option. And this also applies to non-SAP or to external APIs. So we also have quite a variety of those in other systems, which we also access via HTTPS. And for SAP and for non-SAP APIs, we also tend to use passwordless authentication method. So we try to step away from basic authentication, password-based authentication, and use alternative mechanisms. Our preference is OAuth where possible. Our second preference is client certificates for HTTPS communications. OAuth, it brings us to a larger discussion, and it brings us to to questions which are not only about integration. So it brings us to the definition of what are scopes, what are resources, which operations we would like to expose, and how we would like to bundle them into different scopes that can be accessed or can be granted to consumers. The second one is file-based integrations, which we have few of them in certain areas where we couldn't use APIs. Again, we use Cloud Connector to access the file server in VPC. We use more or less the same principles as for APIs in sense of IP allow list and secure transport and passwordless authentication. In this case, we tend to use public keys. And we also stress on encryption at rest. So transport layer, we have encryption in transit, but we also, for file-based integrations, we need to ensure that we encrypt data that will be stored on the file system of the file server. So we tend to use PGP encryption and to some extent signing of content that is exchanged via files where possible. Now, after use cases, a few minutes about lessons learned that we had so far. I'm pretty sure that this list will increase and grow, but at least this is what we have by now. The first one is very critical to ensure that teams, and there are quite a number of teams that are involved in this project, share cloud-friendly mindset, and that they are comfortable with cloud-first principles. Because literally, if there is a team or some other core teams which disregard these principles or which feel themselves not comfortable, it's very likely that the project will not be successful, or there will be quite a lot of pitfalls on the way. The next one is in heterogeneous landscape. As we have, it's very critical to ensure that IT capability metrics is clear, consistent, and understood by teams, so that we don't have, or at least we try to minimize number of overlaps in capabilities. And when we speak about some capability, we are clear about to which product we map that. The next one is don't underestimate impact on development and operations processes. As I mentioned, it's quite significant ground change. So teams who are responsible for these processes, it's very critical to make sure that they understand the change that will happen in their day-to-day life. The next one is don't overcomplicate orchestrations in the integration layer. There are some good examples and bad examples, some examples that can be optimized in that sense in our landscape as well, where we tended to develop quite sophisticated, quite complex integrations. And to some extent, we managed to overcomplicate them. So we covered a lot of different use cases, but at the end, the supportability, maintainability, and predictability of those integrations, they shall be considered. The next one is build adequate and reusable library of test cases. It's better to build it right from the beginning. So as soon as we start designing something, developing something, we can already start building possible test scenarios, test cases, then enrich them with data, extend them with some other test cases. What we can do next is we can keep it up to date, and we can have a look into which tooling we can use to automate it. It literally will save a lot of time. There are some tools that are developed by SAP. There are a lot of tools, and there are some really nice examples of tools that are developed by non-SAP and by some partners from SAP. So I would really encourage you to look into this one. It will save quite a lot of time and efforts. And last few are invest sufficient time in prototyping. Given that our project was process transformation and we changed a lot of platforms, changed a lot of tools, for us it was quite critical that before we get into the project development, we ensure that we are clear about which capabilities are offered by the platform and which capabilities we expect and we can use. And this is why we spent a lot of time in Sandbox doing some prototypes, starting from very tiny things, ending with some more end-to-end flows. The next one is don't be afraid of failures, but fail smart. That's something that we, and I personally, we learned that a lot of times. It's better to fail small and it's better to fail fast. So in such complex projects, it's almost impossible that the journey will be paved just with success stories. So it's almost impossible not to make mistakes, and that's absolutely fine. As soon as this mistake can be rectified, can be understood, analyzed quickly. And it's definitely better to fail fast than to fail big. And the last one, which I would like to highlight, is keep your knowledge up to date and keep yourself aware about new features that arrive to the capabilities and features which are in the roadmap. Integration Suite is a good example in here. Other cloud services can also be considered. Integration Suite gets developed with quite high pace. So features appear every few weeks, new features appear every few weeks. It's a way higher pace than it was for SAP Pure. And in some interfaces and some discussions that we had, it's quite possible that the feature that doesn't exist yet in the Integration Suite now might be already in the roadmap, and it might distress some discussions. So it's always good to look into new features, to follow new features or releases, and to look into what's in the roadmap so that you can consult yourself and you can see where you already have standard functionality, where you will get this feature as a part of standard functionality, and where you will need to develop your custom workarounds or custom solutions. That's it from my side. I would really like to thank you for your time listening to me and watching the slides. Hopefully it was helpful. Now I would like to stop my presentation and hand over.
Thank you so much, Vadim. This was a very, very insightful presentation. And for me, a couple of things which you highlighted, right? The design principles or the difference in design principles versus, for example, for the lift and shift, which is your technical migration versus a true transformation was something which was very important. And you explained the advantages, the drawbacks very well as the core principles, like having a cloud-first mindset. For me, as always, there are some questions, follow-up questions based on your presentation. The first one would be, you mentioned a couple of considerations. right? What would be the top 3 considerations according to you for having a successful migration strategy? The top 3.
Okay, I think the first one is it's less technical, but it's more project positioning. It's to have clear view and shared common view about whether it's a technical migration or is a transformation. Firstly, it's quite critical that stakeholders understand what the project is about, and that teams who are involved in this project, they also understand what they are doing, because as we discussed, there are quite significant differences between these two, and it's not only about what will be the deliverable, what will be the timeline and resources involved in that, but also what expectations we get when we step into this journey. So expectations between technical migration and business transformation will be quite significantly different. So the tools will be, and I think it's quite critical that teams and stakeholders, they do share a common view about this. So they understand what they expect to arrive to. So what's the final destination in there? If I can make that term for the journey, because the journey literally, it will have some destination for the project, but most likely it will unfold the other project right behind after that. The second one is infrastructure readiness and IT teams readiness, variety of IT teams. As mentioned, it's quite significant change in tooling, to some extent in working principles and also in the mindset. So teams, they truly shall buy in these new principles. They shall be ready and open to sit down and to think about, okay, we do things like this now, these things work well, these things might be improved, how we can change this, or what we shall reuse from what we do now, and what we can question and what we can change. So if core teams are not ready for this, if they are happy with what they do and they are not that flexible to change this, it's very likely that there will be some pitfalls and the journey will be at least extended, at most become way more complex. And the last one, the third one, I would think about developer and support readiness. So products, even though we tend to say that Integration Suite is the logical successor of PO, these two products, Integration Suite as a bundle of services and PO, they are fundamentally different from perspective of technologies that are used under the hood. And it's not about linking system A to system B alone, it's also about understanding which tooling is provided, how runtime works, where we can expect what sort of tweaks and tunings, and where we might expect some pitfalls or some risks, so that this is known to developers and to architects when they design new interfaces, and even when they move or lift and shift existing interfaces, so that still there is some potential to tweaking of the interface, and also to operations, so that the operations team is clear about which tools are provided by the platform, which tools they can use out of the box. To some extent, it can be UI tools, UI-based tools. It might be some APIs, and then they can consume them from their own tooling, custom tooling, or third-party tooling, or SAP tooling as well. And which tools they might want to develop themselves or use off-the-shelf tools for that, so that they literally know and they are comfortable with what they're going to get from the platform.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Vadim. And I'm looking at some of the questions which is coming in through the open Q&A, and I see one question which is related from Sven, where he wants to know, how do you decide which integrations are having a priority while you're moving from PO to cloud integration?
Yeah, so for us, that's a good question. Here I shall say that it wasn't, and it isn't only about the integration team who decides in our landscape. So right at the beginning, when this journey from on-prem to the cloud for core systems started, and when we got into S4 migration project, it wasn't actually a single project. It's a program that consists of several projects. Stakeholders decided, and program directors, they decided the sequence of lines of business migration. And we knew that some of them are more critical, and we can, they are like low-hanging fruit, so we can implement or migrate those processes quicker, and we can already see quite substantial benefit of that, for example, for finance. We had most standard finance processes, so it was easier for us to migrate. So we did with integrations for finance. For some other processes like O2C, order to cash, they are more customer tailored, so they are more ARM specific, and we knew that it will take a while to migrate those. So O2C processes were left to the end of the program. When we look within the line of business into the interfaces, we had several work streams. So several work streams, they literally worked in parallel, and we looked into which interfaces are critical and a must. So we definitely have to deliver those. And if we don't deliver, then literally we cannot say that we completed that line of business migration. For some of them, we agreed that there is an opportunity for future automation, but we can have semi-automated or manual process to start with, and then we can improve. So that at the beginning of the journey, we decided what's the deliverable for this particular project, which subsequent developments or which subsequent functionalities it will unblock for us, and how we will deliver them.
Thanks, Vadim. Also from Sven, there are a few questions around the B2B capabilities. Sven, you're absolutely right. PO is a mature product in terms of B2B. And here the comparison would be what we are bringing with or providing with SAP Integration Suite. So with SAP Integration Suite, we already support certain B2B capabilities. Integration Advisor is one of them. We support EDI-based messaging, many EDI-based type systems are supported, flow steps, so on and so forth, adapters. And we also are bringing in newer capabilities like trading partner management, EDI monitoring, as well as archiving. These are functionalities which is very important for B2B integrations, which is also now part of our roadmap. And regarding your question on Integration Advisor functionality and the proposal services and to what extent was used in ARM, I'll turn it over to Vadim. Vadim, if you would like to take this question on, did you use Integration Advisor functionality, example mapping guidelines with proposals?
Yeah, I shall say that at the moment, so far we didn't use it. So we haven't used B2B capabilities in Integration Suite. We also didn't use them in PO systems. So at the moment we have integrations with some external parties, but those don't utilize B2B capabilities, and so do we in Integration Suite. So so far we didn't have, and we currently don't implement real B2B flows where we would need to use, where we can use capabilities of Integration Advisor.
Thanks, Vadim. I have one more question about the testing strategy, and you did emphasize this in your presentation. So how crucial, according to you, is the right testing strategy for having a successful migration?
Short answer would be very crucial. So for us, it was and still is quite significant a piece of project where we have to ensure that tests are done properly. And here I speak about variety of tests, starting from unit tests, ending with integration tests and load tests. So a lot of them. I shall say that we tend to distinguish tactical tests and strategic tests. So there are some tests which can be done very quickly. So those, for example, unit tests. So we encourage developers to ensure that they unit test and they can provide test evidences for interfaces they develop or for components of the interface. And there are some tests which are more kind of strategic. So holistic, those are, for example, integration tests. So we need to ensure that those tests are planned far in advance. Sometimes even before we start the actual development work, there is already some thinking about which tests we will need to do. And then this test library gets built up as far as we progress with the development. Some things worked well, some things they didn't. Even when we started to migrate to Integration Suite, we already knew that we will use a lot of APIs. Well, I shall be more specific, web APIs, so those which are consumed by HTTPS. And we had a view that we can start building the library that will consist of mocks or simulations or cases that can be used by developers primarily, and then can be rolled out and reused by the testing team when doing some more extended tests. And to some extent, they can even be used when doing integration tests, not the mocks themselves, but at least data that was used and things that stood behind definition that those unit tests and those mocks are necessary. And with the integration suite, for us, it was easier to do that. Although I shall admit that some non-technical factors stepped into, and not for all interfaces we could achieve that. Moreover, some tools are comfortable for developers. So if I take Postman as an example, quite a lot of developers do use that for testing web APIs and interfaces. So there are some capabilities that can facilitate building test library out of test flows or test requests that are built in Postman. And the last one, I will say that it's APIs that are used for testing. So at the moment, we cannot use them, but that's something that has been defined in the roadmap, that currently we use simulation tool to some extent heavily in the integration suite to test steps or groups of steps within the iFlow, even before the whole iFlow is tested. And we're looking forward when that will be exposed, this feature will be exposed as an API that can be called externally programmatically. And when we will be able to literally build simulations, run simulations for iFlows or subset of steps within the iFlow, and then consume, invoke that using the APIs and saving the test cases, because literally it will save quite a lot of time for us in the future. What I shall also emphasize is tools and frameworks that can be used for testing, for unit testing or for integration testing. And here we have a variety of those depending on, do we test the code like Groovy or JavaScript or Java, or do we test the particular step, codeless, or we test a particular iFlow. And here we have some good examples of SAP and non-SAP tools that can be used to mock and that can be used to produce the load. And here I shall also say a separate word about load tests. So it's not like we do a lot of load tests for all interfaces, because for quite a lot of interfaces, they are not high volume interfaces. So we do some nominal testing about workload, but for some of them we do, and we used to do, and we do load testing. And this is where it also becomes quite critical that we understand what are restrictions and what are constraints in the cloud when we come to the workload, to the load pattern. So we at ARM, we can use quite a lot of tools that we used to use in the past for load and for performance testing. But here it comes how the platform will behave. And it's again the question, how clear we are about which are components that execute the interface and where we might expect certain performance problems or performance issues or bottlenecks. So it's a combination of tools that we can reuse, techniques that we can reuse, and understanding of what we're looking for and where in which components, which bottlenecks we're looking for. And this knowledge is quite, to some extent, it's different between, to a big extent, it's different between pure and cloud integration. So there are quite a lot of different moving components that can produce performance bottlenecks in cloud integration if the interface is not considered for volume. So if we know that the interface might hit the volume, that already shall be one of significant parts for consideration when we design the interface. So it's not only about the platform, it's also about how we design, how we build the interface.
Thanks, Vadim, for that detailed response. And with respect to the testing, we also have capabilities now to in place for testing different flow steps and mapping within your integration flow. This can support for some kind of a unit test as well for your scenarios, right? And a related question is, did you use any automated test tool? You mentioned Postman for some amount of testing. Is there any other tools you used as well for testing in your scenarios? Anything you would like to share?
Yep. Well, at the moment, we at least for SAP integrations, we don't use any tools for unit testing, so that we don't use things like CI/CD pipelines. We looked into this, and it's in the roadmap, but it's not yet in reality. Although that would have improved the scope of testing and potentially the quality of testing. For automated tools that we do use, a lot of those, they reside in the space of load and performance testing. So historically, we used quite a lot JMeter, Apache JMeter for testing. And we also looked into Solution Manager. So we considered how we can use Solution Manager, given that we already invested into Solution Manager for other areas. We also looked into how we can use Solution Manager for integration tests and for load tests. We don't use it now, but we started to look into work centers that can help us.
And you mentioned about the APIs which you're exposing from S4, right? Is this something which has been, so there is a question from Sven, when exposing APIs, are those passed through from S4 or designed in cloud integration?
I would say mixture. So there are quite a lot of APIs that are literally we develop integration flows with some logic built in the iFlow. From the past, we had some flows that were passed through, but those were very few, and those were mostly because of security constraints, so that the external parties, they don't have direct access to the core system. In new integrations, more and more flows that we develop, if we have requirement for pass-through, we try to solve it somewhere else. So we try not to use cloud integration as purely security, constraint security proxy. So we look into other ways how we can make this proxy so that still the core system is not accessed directly from the outside, but we tend not to use iFlow that only links system A and system B and does nothing in between. So what we do for new integrations is, if we need to develop the integration flow within cloud integration, this means that there is some features, some functionalities that we need to put into this iFlow. Sometimes it's mappings or conversions or enrichments and orchestrations. Sometimes it's security, but security related, for example, to encryption of content or decryption, signing or signature verification of content, and so on.
Thanks, Vadim. And also a reminder to all our audience, in case if you have any questions, please feel free to post it into the question and answer section. And I'm going through all of them, and we will answer it live, or we will definitely share the responses after our session in case we are not able to go through the complete list. So Vadim, one more question, again, going back to your use cases. Is ARM planning to leverage event mesh or event-driven architecture, and what sort of use cases you have? I think you touched upon this, but maybe you can share a bit more on the use case.
Yeah. It's a really good question, and we do. So the answer is yes. We already use event-driven architecture. So for us, the ability to expose an API on top of core data objects and ability to emit events from the core systems, those capabilities are key. So for us, this means literally that if the state of the object within the core system changes, we want to ensure that the system is capable of emitting event, preferably near real time, where technically possible. So that's for us, so that we can have other subscribers who get this information quite quickly. And coming to the question about event mesh, may I split this into two questions? So the first one is event mesh as a capability within the integration suite, and the second one is event mesh as a general architecture principle. So coming to the question about integration suite capability, at the moment we looked into event mesh back in time when it was enterprise messaging service. Currently we don't use it, although we considered it heavily for S4 system. Currently we use a different message broker for that. Looking into event mesh as a concept, when we have different message brokers or potentially a single message broker which cascades and broadcasts events, currently we don't really use event mesh concept. What we do use is we use message brokering concept and pub sub concept, but it means that we publish the message and then we have some subscribers. There are some minimal steps within the message broker, but at the moment I cannot call it a true event mesh where we have, well, we might have multiple event brokers from different vendors exchanging messages and cascading those messages. So at the moment, it's not yet there, although might be it will be in the future if we will see a welcome for events that we publish, that we produce from core systems. And here I speak not only about SAP, it's also about non-SAP.
Thanks, Vadim. So one other question about moving from process orchestration to cloud integration. Do you have any NetWeaver BPM interfaces in your landscape? What is the plan on migrating BPM interfaces from PO2CI. So here, just one quick addition from my side would be that most of these integration patterns, which does not involve any human interaction, are supported in Integration Suite, more specifically in the cloud integration offering. And the successor for BPM, which has any kind of a human-centric integrations or processes, would be the workflow service. But I will also turn it over to you, Vadim, to explain how you're doing this at ARM.
I will be lucky in that sense, because that will be a quick answer to the question. We used to have several BPMs in our PO landscape, but we don't have them anymore. So those BPMs were mostly to satisfy some technical requirements where we needed to do several sequences of steps, sequence of calls when calling some systems, but those interfaces and some of those systems, they were deprecated and replaced with other systems as a part of this transformation project. And anyway, we didn't have, even in the past, we didn't have many of those BPMs, and number of steps within those BPMs, it was probably less than 10, maybe 10, 15 steps. So they were not large BPMs. And by the time when we got into cloud integration, we didn't need to migrate those, because those BPMs were already deprecated by that time. Speaking about user-centric, that was about system-centric. So we never used BPMs which were user-centric within PO. So BPM engine within PO system was only used for system-centric. For user-centric, as you already mentioned, there is a workflow service in BTP, and that's exactly what we use in several flows, S/4HANA facing flows for user-centric integration interactions, like, for example, some approver flows.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Vadim. So one last question which I see here is where integration partners involved in supporting your migration to cloud integration, and was any did you get any support in that direction at all?
I'm not sure if I understood this question correctly. We didn't really have integration partners, but we do have implementation partners, and they also cover integration. So it's not only about integration that they are focused on, but they work with us very closely, hand in hand, on the entire program, on the entire migration from ECC to S4 and from some other legacy systems to some new capabilities. And integration is considered as one of big pieces of work within that this journey. So the same implementation partner and our hosting partners, they work closely with us on this project. So to some extent, I can say yes, they work with us, but they are not just for integration. So they are our implementation partners.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Vadim. Thank you. And the last question over here, coming from one of our participants, is how do you transform point-to-point integrations? Have you created standard generic templates to reduce development in integration layer?
Okay, so point-to-point is told that we tend to reduce those. So we tend not to use point-to-point in many integrations, just by exception. As for templates, when we moved to cloud integration, we started to look into major patterns that we use, from perspective of which adapters we use, which protocols we use, which authentications we use, which mapping techniques we use. I cannot call that we created proper programmatic templates that we can just take off the shelf and create the iFlow based on them, but it was more like written internal best practices about which techniques we favor and in which sequence. And for those steps which are highly reusable, we created reusable iFlows, we created reusable artifacts. I shall say that script collection, this feature was introduced quite recently in cloud integration, and I'm pretty sure that we will use that part, this feature a lot in our new developments, because one part is reusable iFlows that we have, and another part we also have a set of free scripts that have high potential for reusability. So we will have a mixture of them. But again, it's not what I can call as a template. So those are reusable functionalities.
Now you also have reusable mappings, right? So we are almost now at the top of the hour. Thank you so much, Vadim, for this very insightful and valuable presentation. And I hope to the audience you found this valuable as well. Thank you everyone for your time. And this brings us to the end of the session. And I wish you all a very nice day, good evening, based on where you are. And next time we again meet with another customer and understand their integration journey. Until then, thank you so much, and hand it back to Moshe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a great call. I would also like to remind everyone to contribute in the community in the SAP Integration Suite tag, and also to visit the topic page. The recording will be available in the SAP Community Calls page. I've shared the link before. So thank you, everyone. I will stop the recording now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.